Welcome to another edition of Redevelopment, where we talk with top thinkers and doers in the international development space. We're in the midst of reimagining the future of international development. I am really honored today to be joined by Professor Andrew Natsios, who was administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development from 2001 to 2006 under President Bush. He has a very long resume. He's also served as a special envoy to Sudan, a vice president of one of the largest development NGOs in the world, World Vision. And he has been a university professor for a number of years, I believe first at Georgetown, and now is the director at the Scowcroft Institute of International Affairs at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M. Professor Natsios, welcome to Redevelopment.
Thank you very much. Well, good to be here.
It's a bit of an understatement to say that U.S. foreign aid has been shaken up recently, changed dramatically. In one of your commentaries about these shifts we've seen at USAID, you've said of U.S. foreign assistance, quote, "This assistance is one of the most powerful tools Washington has to push back against Chinese and Russian influence and to prevent transnational threats such as disease and terrorism from reaching U.S. soil." I wonder if you can say a little more about that and elaborate on how you think the shutdown of USAID, among other impacts, will have negative impacts on the United States.
Well, I always start out my talks with a research enterprise today that is almost unknown. There was a plant disease attacking sorghum about 20 years ago. It was called striga. It's a weed that attaches to the sorghum roots and kills the crop. And we're the largest producer of sorghum in the world, 8 million tons. Ethiopian American, who got his PhD with a USAID scholarship, did research with an AID grant to find a way of breeding a sorghum variety that would be resistant to striga. And he did. And he went on to become a professor at Purdue in Indiana. And that solved the striga problem. So when you eat Texas beef, you're eating AID food. And even though it was developed for the developing world, we had ranchers come in from Texas to thank AID for developing the seed. Second, 60% of the wheat grown in the United States is resistant to wheat rust, which is a plant disease. And that wheat was developed by CIMMYT, which is part of the CGIAR, the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, which was AID helped found in the 60s to institutionalize the Green Revolution. So when you eat a loaf of bread, or maybe part of a loaf of bread, you're eating AID wheat. And why is that? Because Norman Borlaug, who won the Nobel Prize for Peace for the Green Revolution, he told me once it's because of AID that we, through CIMMYT, through the CGIAR, developed this wheat rust resistance wheat that was for the developing world, but our farmers now use in the United States. I could bring up HIV/AIDS, the PEPFAR program, President Bush, the malaria initiative. There's a study that was just done by Lancet, which is the most respected European journal of public health, by a group of social scientists funded by the Spanish government. It has nothing to do with AID or the U.S. government. They didn't get any money from AID to do the study. And they concluded that AID had saved, through its food programs, its agriculture programs, and its health programs, 92 million people between 2001 and 2021. And that 16 million people would die in the next 6 years because we have destroyed it. I am a big supporter of the State Department, but the State Department is not a development institution and has a short-term time horizon. AID needs to have a much longer time horizon, as AID has been more and more absorbed by other agencies, the State Department in particular. The time horizon for programs has collapsed, and that has reduced the success rate of programs. I fear it will get worse now that this is in state because they need quick results. And we don't produce quick results that are sustainable over the long term. It takes a long time to do this stuff. But when we do it, it has a profound effect on the whole world.
You say a little more about the soft power involved in this. You make a very, very convincing case about the many, many ways that Americans are better off with AID than without it. But the soft power argument is one which is interesting as well. Hearts and minds of people around the world.
Well, I wrote an article for Foreign Affairs, the journal, at their request in late January, early February, on the consequence of shutting down AID. And I said we do need to retool our aid program given great power rivalry. I argued that we should be locating aid missions in countries that affect the food security system of the planet. Food security has a huge effect on political stability. Tunisia, Libya, Yemen, Egypt, Syria, those were caused by food price increases because of collapse of the food system in those countries. People thought, it's because of political oppression that these countries were thrown into chaos. It was not. It's because of food price increases. We're going to have more of this happen now because the principal way we would deal with this is through development programs, agricultural development programs, market-based programs. And that's been undermined by the destruction of aid. So I think this is a disaster for the American people and for the developing world. And we are one of the biggest agricultural producers in the world. Our crops are exported and countries rely on it. There's a study done by a British think tank on the choke points in the high seas that affect the shipping industry, the ships for food. The two biggest ones are the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal, but the Dardanelles that go into the Black Sea, the Straits of Hormuz, these choke points affect the ability to move food around the world. If a couple of them are paralyzed at the same time, we could collapse the world food system. One way of stabilizing the countries where these choke points exist is to have robust aid programs. I think we should never have shut down the aid mission in Panama. Panamanians didn't want to shut down the aid mission. Guess who moved in after we moved out of Panama? The Chinese did. Chinese don't leave. They come here and stay. I mean, we have such a short memory in the United States. We're putting ourselves at risk. The whole Pacific Rim is now taken over by the Chinese. We only recently set up an aid program for the island nations of the Pacific. We should have done that a long time ago when Xi Jinping started Chinese businesses and aid programs taking over all these small island countries. That's all shut down now as a result of the shutdown of aid, which is a mistake, I think. And it's a mistake for the developing world, but it's also a mistake for us.
One of your successors, Mark Green in particular, talked a lot about self-sufficiency and graduating countries. I know from some things you've written that you never bought into that. Is that largely because of the argument you're making now about?
Yes, exactly. And if a country's become South Korea, and AID had a huge amount to do with South Korea's success and Taiwan's success, Thailand, they don't have aid programs now. I'm not suggesting that South Korea should have an aid program, but most middle-income countries have a real risk of regression. Venezuela was the richest country in Latin America. No one thinks it's a rich country now. It's a disaster. I could go through a whole bunch of other countries. Russia and Turkey had large aid programs at one point, and they are regressing because their leadership is so bad. But I'm talking about domestically. I mean, Putin's also an aggressor for what he's done to the Ukraine. So my point is, I don't think we should use graduation I think we should use U.S. interest to determine whether or not we should close an aid mission. I do think that as a country becomes more prosperous, the nature of the program should change. If a country is upper middle income, the program should shift maybe to a university linkages program where we link their universities with our universities, their industry with our industry through global development alliances, public-private partnerships. So I think we can change the program. But if you want to ensure that American leadership continues in the world, we need to have the aid missions functional in these countries. I actually think we should be expanding the missions. We've just shut them all down, which is a disaster.
Well, it relates to my next question, which is about the U.S. population, and you're as familiar with all the polling data as I am, that when you ask people, do they support foreign aid, they say, it's a waste of money and we got problems here at home. If you talk about particular programs, do you support a program to feed undernourished babies or give people AIDS medicines they need to stay alive? They say, oh, yeah, we support that. And you ask them how much we spend on aid and how much we should spend, and they estimate 25% of GDP and should only spend 10%. And all of that. So those numbers have been pretty steady for a long time. Did you worry about that when you were administrator? Should we worry about that now? I mean, my sense is that they started with AID because it was an agency that didn't really have much of a domestic constituency.
That is the biggest problem. And there's a federal law that Senator Helms got through from North Carolina that prohibited us from educating the American people. And because the country's so large, there's so many. I mean, we're the third largest country in the history of the world. People forget that. 340 million people. It's not easy to get to educate people on what we're doing. I do think this catastrophe with the destruction of aid has improved the public understanding of what we do. But the attacks that were made by Elon Musk are contemptible because they were lies. I mean, I can go through the list. There is a federal a nonprofit that judges the competence of federal agencies to see whether or not they're scientifically based, they're based on evidence. AID's ranked the third best run federal agency. When he runs, and AID's had clean audits for 8 years now. What's the basis for him saying that it's full of fraud? I mean, they destroyed the agency based on a lie? It's outrageous, actually. It's infuriated me to listen to it. The Pentagon hasn't had a clean audit, and I'm a retired lieutenant colonel in the reserve. I served in the Gulf War. My son served in Afghanistan. My uncle served in World War II. I'm pro-military. They haven't had a clean audit in 8 years in the Pentagon. They shut the Pentagon down? I don't think so. So this whole thing is political. It was designed to appeal to the worst instincts of people who don't pay a lot of attention to foreign affairs. But it's affecting the American people. We are now defenseless against against disease, against food insecurity in the world, plant diseases that are going to affect the world food system. Who's going to protect us?
How could USAID be reconstituted at some point in the future? It seems like a difficult problem sitting where we are today.
I am sending into a major publishing house a book I've been working on since I left AID. And they are now going to publish it. It was going to be an academic work. I've retooled it, and I got to rewrite it in the last 6 months over what's happened on AID and what AID does, and the environment for bureaucratic environment in Washington for getting work done. It'll be done this week, and I describe in it some of the reforms. One of the reforms is to create a Department of International Development, which reports to the president directly and is part of the National Security Council in a permanent seat, where we move all of the aid programs that are left, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, the IFC, the aid program, $16 billion worth of aid programs still exist in the State Department. They should not be there. I'm sorry. I am retired. I was a diplomat for a while. I have great respect for the state. It is not a project management agency. Its time horizon is a year or two. Aid programs, when during the Cold War, were 10 to 20 years. Because what aid's about is building institutions, private institutions like markets, public institutions like health ministries and universities and colleges, public schools. It's in our interest to have that in a federal department with all of these agencies in the same place so they don't compete with each other. So that's one reform. The second is, during the Cold War, we had a highly decentralized system. Development is different in each country. You don't do development programs the same in each country. It's just institutions are affected by culture and geography and language and history. And so you need to decentralize power to the field. During the Cold War, the mission directors, the head of AID in the field, had enormous power. And some people in Washington resented that, but it worked. I mean, I go through the examples in my book of things that worked during the Cold War. The Green Revolution. People think of Dr. Borlaug. He did the breeding. with support from the Rockefeller and Ford Foundation. But the implementation of that program to bring high-yield staple crops to the developing world was implemented principally by aid. And I asked Dr. Borlaug, who I knew when he was still alive. He taught here at Texas A&M. We still have a Borlaug Institute here, named after him. He said AID helped implement it, and 50% of the aid budget in the early 70s was used to implement the Green Revolution. It was a huge success. According to the National Academy of Science, independent study that was done, it increased food production by 300%, with only a 30% increase in the land area being cultivated because of the improved varieties, the use of fertilizer, the development of rural road systems and markets. All of that was done by AID. It fed the world. It feeds the world now. People don't even understand that. So I do think that one of the reforms is we need to move more money into those areas, what I would call the productive areas of development from an economic standpoint, which is one reason I'm on this program, because that's what TechnoServe does. You should be triple the size that you are now because you're doing exactly what we need to stabilize the international system.
Let me ask you about way back in 2005, you talked about local ownership as a key principle of reconstruction and development in an article you did. And today, I think localization has been a point of focus in the development community. You're talking about a different, and I would think more, it's part State Department, part AID. You've really made the strong case for the soft power argument. But are you in favor of local ownership? And if so, how do you think about that best happening?
Institution building is hard to count, but institution building is about what we're all about. Localization should be focused on institution building, not necessarily just giving money to local entities, because Congress will not support neither party in transferring all our money to the bureaucracies of developing countries, because many of them are patrimonial or clientelist states. They're overstaffed, very bureaucratic, and their bureaucracies are very corrupt, many of them. And they change depending who the president is. That's not how you build institutions. So AID is focused more on the private sector because there's less of that clientelism in the private sector than there is in the public sector. So AID has done more than almost any other aid agency, bilateral, multilateral, in developing private markets and private sector systems because they show more promise in terms of economic growth. And,
I think
that's where we should focus our aid programs.
I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa and Sierra Leone almost 40 years ago, hard to believe. And I have been, I was for a while feeling very optimistic about a new generation of African leaders. I mean, you've talked about building institutions and you've talked about the problems in many of these bureaucracies. And you put it mildly, in my opinion. But I guess I want to turn that around and ask where you see encouraging things going on in governments and institutions around the continent of Africa, whether they're green shoots or whether they're more than that.
Well, Steve Radlett, who was the chief economist of aid under President Obama, teaches at Georgetown. In fact, the chair he has is the chair I had when I was teaching there for 6 years before I came to Texas A&M. Steve did a study on two studies that were very interesting. One of them was people say, well, we spend all this money in foreign aid. It's not having an effect on growth. Only 10% of the aid budget is spent on economic growth. The great bulk of it is spent on disaster relief. Disaster relief is not designed to be sustainable. It's taking care of people where the government's collapsed or the government's predatory. But the real impact of the research that Steve Radlett did is he shows that in 19 African countries that are democracies, there has been an improvement in the economic growth over a 20-year period. But it's only now 19. There are, 58 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, something like that. And there's a whole bunch of countries that it didn't improve in. But Botswana is a middle-class democracy. And it's doing very. We don't have an aid program in Botswana anymore. Ghana, until recently, has been doing very well. Economically, it's in crisis right now, but for 30 years it was growing, and the aid programs were working very well there. along with local leadership. That's the thing. We cannot change bad leadership. If a country chooses populist leaders who are demagogues, who run around with, I am very hostile to socialism and Marxism, but people run around thinking that's going to solve the problems of the developing world. They're not. It's making a revival now. It's not. Markets work when they're allowed to work. Too often in the developing world, markets are actually clientelists, and they're corrupted because the elites use them for their own purposes. So I think when the full weight of the U.S. government is put on promoting the aid program, making it successful, our programs tend to have a much higher success rate. But we cannot actually change bad leadership. That's the problem. It is what it is.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how to make U.S. foreign assistance more politically durable, but you may have just answered that.
Yeah. We have to deal with the world as it is. Too many people who go to aid, young people particularly, very idealistic, want to solve every single problem in the developing world use AID. We can't do that. We know what works and when it works. And I think if a government is hostile to economic growth and to market reforms and to democracy, we can't force them to do it. We need to maybe just focus on those shorter term things. And then the countries that are going through reform efforts, as Botswana did and Ghana did, and these 19 countries that Steve Radlick wrote about, then we need to put more money in those countries.
I think there's been a huge evolution compared to as recently as 10 years ago, where many companies who were sourcing goods in emerging markets saw it as zero sum. And if I can buy that 10% cheaper, I win. And I think almost all the companies now understand that if the family that's growing whatever it is, the coffee they're buying or whatever it is, if that family's living in poverty, that's actually a threat to their core business because it may not be there when they need to buy it again, or it may not be the quality they need it to be. And I think the markets outlive a lot of politicians will come and go, and the markets are there. My view is that, not surprisingly perhaps, is that the private sector is going to play an even more important role, at least in the short to medium term, with the pullback of official ODA from the U.S. and some other donors.
Right.
I've just got a couple more questions I wanted to ask you. And let me ask you sort of a more personal question in terms of why you've made a career in international development and why does it matter to you personally? You've cited a lot of research and a lot of data, obviously, but is there a story, is there an experience you had somewhere that was formative or important for you relating to that stimulated this interest?
My grandfather was a tenant farmer in Greece during the Ottoman Empire. He immigrated to the United States. He did not own his land. There were 9 kids in the family. He was an agro-pastoralist. They grew wheat in the summertime, and he tended the animal herds in the wintertime up in the mountains. And he came when he was a young guy because he wanted a better life. I asked him why he came to America. He said, I had to work and make sure my kids got college degrees and became professional people. My grandfather made $9 a week in the mills in Lowell. He was illiterate in Greek and English. He immigrated in 1905, and the tenement they lived in did not have hot water in it, didn't have central heat. And this is Massachusetts now. And all my uncles and my aunt got college degrees and became professional people. My father was a research scientist in textiles, and he used to tell a story when my sister and I would not eat our dinner. Eat your dinner, or you're not getting up from the table. I said, why is that? He said, Dimitri Karademus, he was my great uncle, and he died of starvation during the Greek famine. During the Nazi occupation of Greece in World War II. 300,000 Greeks starved to death. There were 6% of the population of the country died. Nazis stripped the country of food to feed Rommel's army in North Africa, and the Greeks died en masse. He was buried in a mass grave. And so I remember that story. Whenever there is a famine, I remember what happened to Greece. So yes, it's very personal for me. I think often of my family experience when I would go to the developing world. Greece, when I went to Greece as a kid in 1963, it was a third world country. It's not the richest country in Europe, but it's an advanced industrial power now and a democracy. And it's largely because of development. AID had a lot to do with the building of AID in the 60s, of Greece in the 1960s.
I really relate very much to what you're saying. I mean, my own personal background's a little different, but when I think about the work that TechnoServe does, I often say we're really in the business of providing opportunities to people. And if they, I think Nick Kristof said that intelligence and industriousness is equally distributed around the planet, but opportunity is not. And if you can get opportunity in front of these people and they can see it, they will seize it and go. We're just sort of cracking the door open for them, is how I think about what we do in
Right.
a lot of places. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I should have asked you about and I didn't?
Well, I could go on. That's what I teach. So it's not just my experience at AID and at World Vision, but I do think we've made a terrible mistake, and I think it needs to be corrected. And so I am not retiring from this fight. It's just begun.